What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Angle of Pursuit podcast. We are back live on YouTube. Brian and I have, obviously, with the coronavirus and other issues, not been doing a ton of live. We've been doing some NASCAR. We've been doing some sports betting, but we are back to talk our bread and butter, to talk some fantasy football. And Brian, we have Yahoo's Matt Harmon with us to break it all down. Talk some reception perception and make us sound a lot smarter. So Matt, how's it going?
Things are good. Like we said before we started taping, all things considered, I feel like I have to say that now every time anyone asks me, how are things going? It's like, well, all things considered, it's going all right. Just kind of trying to take some time to. We're gonna be taking some time to visit some family here soon because just got to kind of get it in when you can. We'll be making a big road trip starting on Friday, so that will be fun. But until then, happy to just sit here and blab about football, man. That's what we all want to do, anyways.
Absolutely. And Brian Twining, as always, with me, blabbing about football. That could actually be the name of this episode.
Yeah, we were just talking prior to starting here that it's nice to get back to, like you said, our bread and butter. And with the football season, you're starting to hear more about camps, getting more excited about guys reporting. It's just, let's just keep our fingers crossed that the league gets started and it goes on without a hitch. Even as Matt said, with all things considered, like, we just want football. That's all.
That's it. And if everybody does the right things, we will hopefully, fingers crossed, have it. Matt, obviously, reception perception, wide receiver whisperer. I want to know one thing before we dive into all that. We're going to talk a bunch of these second-year wide receivers. We're going to talk some A.J. Brown, some Deante Johnson, some Terry McLaurin. Who is one player that you're getting really hyped about that is not a wide receiver, a running back, quarterback, tight end, anything else? Somebody that you're just finding yourself gravitating towards in best balls. Somebody that keeps, whenever you're reading Twitter or whatever, you see nugget and it keeps popping up. Is there one name that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I think a few of the quarterbacks by extension of the wide receivers, like, for example, today I wrote about Josh Allen because as a long time, Stephon Diggs, John Brown, like original hype train driver, baby. I feel like these guys are now both on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
They've got Josh Allen, and it's like, I got to sit here and say to myself, man, am I about to have to get on board the Josh Allen train just because am I going to get emotionally invested in that? That doesn't feel completely comfortable for me. But, so it's like I start digging into him a little bit. And I mean, he's a really appealing fantasy player as it is, obviously because of the rushing. He's been top 3 in rushing yards and rushing attempts among quarterbacks and touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons. That's appealing. But obviously I think there's some room for growth in terms of his passing, but obviously I think it's going to be on the Bills in terms of how are they going to construct this offense to a point where they can minimize his mistakes. I just wrote a piece about it today, and when you really dive into it, so much of Josh Allen's mistakes are when he goes off script because and I think one of the best analogies I ever heard about his game was from Charles McDonald and Justice Mosqueda on their podcast, which is off and on now. It's called Setting the Edge. But if you ever listen to it, one of the analogies they made is that Josh Allen essentially looks like every 2 seconds into every play, he wakes up and realizes, oh my God, I'm playing NFL quarterback. And if the numbers show, if he holds onto the ball longer than 3.5 seconds, it's a mess. The numbers are just a train wreck. So I think there's some things that the Bills can do there to minimize those situations. And, they have 2 of the best outside separators in the NFL now. Maybe that is part of the logic of why they acquire these 2 players. So I think by extension of some of the wide receivers, I'm getting excited about quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Kyler Murray. Obviously, everybody is excited about. Even, when you go down the list, there's so many. Obviously, every year there's great quarterback values. So there's definitely some passers I'm getting excited about. In terms of running backs, usually I have one player that I'm really hyped about in the mid rounds, but man, honestly, all the drafts I've done right now, it just seems totally dead to the point that once you're into the 5th, 6th round, you're looking at, do I really want to take David Johnson here? Maybe.
I think you might want to. I think
that's a good spot in Houston. I mean, Carlos Hyde produced, almost 1,000 yards, and
I know.
I would have to say David Johnson's a better player than Carlos Hyde at this point in their careers.
Yeah, no, I hear you. There's been several drafts where I've ended up making that decision. And, I think it's easy to just want to assume that David Johnson's going to fail because the trade was so terrible. The DeAndre Hopkins trade, it's the worst trade in NFL history, in my opinion, without the benefit of hindsight. I don't need, there are plenty of other trades that look bad in hindsight. Ricky Williams, the Herschel Walker deal, whatever. There's plenty of those that are terrible, terrible trades, but we knew from the moment that this trade happened, it was awful. So that's one thing. But I think that David Johnson can still have a pretty good season, and the trade will always be awful. There's almost no way. If he puts up 3,000 total yards and 35 touchdowns, maybe. But other than that, this is going to be a trade no matter what.
He could borderline MVP candidate and still be terrible. It makes zero sense.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's it is a good spot for Johnson, and I think there's a chance that if there are camps and which I just can't imagine that being the case, just to be completely honest. But if there are camps in the middle of August and he's having some pretty good moments, I wouldn't totally surprise me, because we are he is such a talented player in his own right. And then another guy that I've seen people compare him to that I am getting excited about is one late round running back sleeper that I really like is Gibson, the rookie running back in Washington. I think there's just a lot of potential there, because it's tough to look at that backfield and think anything's going to come out of it. But I do think if there's someone, it could be Gibson as a pass catcher there.
Yeah, well, especially because he doesn't really he does things that the rest of the backfield doesn't really do. And there is going to be unique ways to kind of implement him. And, I think that Washington offense could be better. And hopefully Dwayne Haskins, I still have a little bit of faith that can pan out.
You and your Ohio State love.
But hey, I only back the guys I truly believe in. I don't care if they wore the scarlet and gray. Let's dive into some of these second-year receivers. And Brian, let's start with Tebow Samuel, who actually obviously last week had the foot injury. There's a lot of kind of talk about how long it could actually be out, how much we may actually miss him. If the football season starts on time, they're saying 6 to 8 weeks. There's Liz Frank, there's Jones fracture, there's, Hakeem Nicks basically was going into a monster deal, got the injury and was never the same. Obviously, Debo's a much younger player, but a player that utilizes speed, utilizes versatility. And if this foot injury is a problem, it's concerning. So I guess in terms of a redraft mindset, is he a guy that you're even considering drafting if we say start on time and everything is kind of status quo?
I'm not really a huge fan of Tebow coming into this season, even kind of prior to the injury. I just think that with Emmanuel Sanders leaving, going to New Orleans, it kind of propels Tebow into that number one role where he's going to see a lot more double coverage. Teams are going to be kind of keying on him. And he did a lot of his work after the catch. I think he was top 5 or top 10 in the NFL in yards after catch. With the injury to the foot, we all know that those can be pretty pesky. And, just a slight divot in the ground and he's trying to plant, it could aggravate the injury. Ligaments can be weaker after an injury like this. So he's somebody I'd be pretty wary of drafting, just with the kind of style of offense that they like to run, and the fact that he would be pretty much the only threat on the outside for the Niners. So he's not really somebody I'm targeting. If he slips into the later rounds and he's my wide receiver 4, I'd take that chance, but there's no way he's sliding that far.
Yeah. Matt, what about behind him? Is there anybody? Jalen Hurd, Brandon Ayuk, maybe Dante Pettis is still a thing. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on anybody in that passing game?
Yeah, I think you make a ton of great points about Tebow too. And the reality is that I don't even think that was going to be a great role anyways. He wasn't a player, even at the peak situation where he's not healthy, I don't think I was going to take him at the cost he was going to go in fantasy, because no matter what, I really don't want to make a habit of taking guys at the range that he was going to go in if they're not going to be the top target on their team. And there's just no way I think that he has within his skill set to become a top flight receiver to the point that he's usurping George Kittle as the number one target on the team. So he's out of the picture for now at this point. I mean, Ayuk is interesting because he has obviously the same after catch ability that Tebow does, but I also think that he probably want to deploy him differently than Tebow because he's a little bit more slight. And I think he could be a big difference maker as a vertical threat if they're able to move him inside or put him at flanker where he's not going to see a ton of press coverage because you just have there's nothing from his college tape that tells you he's going to be able to beat press coverage in the NFL, not just because you don't see it very often, but even on the reps that he does face press coverage, those are not very good reps. I do think, however, he can get loose, get vertical. There's enough deception to his deep route running that against off-man coverage, he can make a lot of big plays. So there are ways to do that, but I don't necessarily think you want him to be your top receiver on your team. I don't think that any of these guys in San Francisco want to be on your top receiver at your team at this point. But if somebody's going to replace Tebow in the way that he was a rushing factor, in the way that he could be used on slants, quick breaking routes like that, I do think that could be Jalen Hurd. I mean, it's a long shot, obviously, because we've seen exactly 0.0 from him as a pro. But just from like a skill set standpoint, guy's a former SEC running back. He successfully transitioned to a big interior slot receiver at Baylor during his final college season. And it seems like the team really liked him. You know, there's plenty of reports that they want to line him up at H-back. They want to get him some running back touches. They want to get him some slot touches. So if somebody picks up the slack here and it's not the obvious guy they just took in the first round this past year, it could be Jalen Hurd, who I do believe has potential to develop into that kind of player.
Yeah. And I've been a big Jalen Hurd fan since his days at Tennessee. I was impressed with his kind of transition to at Baylor because it's not that easy just to transfer from running back to receiver and learn the routes. And he obviously the versatility will be key. And if someone's going to find a way to use him well, it'll be Kyle Shanahan. So let's run through some of these names and we'll pick your brain and see where you're at. And let's start with my boy AJ Brown out in Tennessee.
I've been waiting for that. Come on, man. We're talking second-year receivers, Titans guy. Let's do this thing.
Let's do this. Okay. So talk me off the ledge and tell me why AJ Brown isn't going to be a complete bust in 2020.
Well, I mean, I think the skill set's there, right? You know, that's the number one thing. I think for fantasy, or let's just talk about the negatives at first, like for his fantasy outlook. Obviously, I think there's reasonable question about the passing volume overall in Tennessee. That's certainly, I think, questionable. You're definitely looking at some regression for Ryan Tannehill just from a pure statistical perspective. I think Tannehill's still going to be a good starting quarterback because I think what you saw from him just when you purely watch him play was that this was a guy who was really letting it rip. He was free to make plays down the field much more than Marcus Mariota was. I mean, it was an immediate, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, man, but like it was an immediate just shot in the arm watching a guy who wasn't Marcus Mariota play in this offense, just because he would do the two things that it felt like Mariota was so afraid to do, which was number one, like I said, just let it rip downfield and use your legs, man. It just seemed like the last couple of seasons, Mariota just completely fell apart from an improvisational standpoint. And when you're that athletic, it's problematic when you haven't developed to the point that you're not going to take chances downfield and you're not going to take chances with your legs. We don't need to relitigate that case, but I don't think that Mariota. I mean, I don't think that Ryan Tannehill is going to completely fall apart as a passer, but it's just the overall passing volume that's a question. But what's not in question is that AJ Brown is a freaking stud, man. And the real thing that was the most impressive part of him as a rookie was that I think, maybe you guys fell into the same boat. I know I definitely did, and others. We all expected him to be a good player, I think. I thought he was one of the top two receivers in last year's draft class, right up there with Marquise Brown. But I projected him, at least early in his career, to be a big slot receiver. Like, he would be a guy who played inside. Maybe he would be – I know a lot of people – I didn't compare him to this player, but I know a lot of people compared him to, like, Juju Smith-Schuster as a guy that you can use exclusively inside and make plays after the catch over the middle of the field. But that was not what A.J. Brown did. He was in his reception perception sample. He was outside and on the line of scrimmage on over 85% of his sampled snaps. That's what you're out there playing X receiver, big time football, facing number one corners, press coverage routinely, and he dominated in that role on short routes, intermediate routes. We know he made big plays down the field and after the catch. Like, he's Anquan Bolden from a physical perspective because he plays the game like such a bully. but he's a more like juiced up version of Anquan Boldin, at least the Anquan Boldin I think that we all remember with like the Ravens and 49ers or whatever. But so I don't think that we need to put limits on this player from a purely individual standpoint. I do think it's worth questioning if he can get the overall volume that he'll need to pay back his cost in fantasy, but sometimes talent does create opportunity. And if that is the case in Tennessee, this player does have the talent to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at his pure like production from last year. This is a guy that scored basically 2.28 fantasy points per target. That was something that was a way outlier for anybody inside, the top 30. That's kind of a per target rate of guys that see 50 targets, not guys that see, close to 100. Obviously, as we talked about the Titans offense, that's just not what they do. Now, if you're saying Tannehill, we saw steps when he was just kind of put in place. Now he's got a whole offseason to tweak the offense a little bit more in his direction. They get Darrington Evans, which is a running back that I love, of super versatile, can obviously, we have Derrick Henry and they're going to run the crap out of him. But if they can pass a little bit more, open up the offense just a little bit more, I would be more excited about A.J. Brown and his potential. But if you take his fantasy points per target down to 2 points a game, or down to 2 points per target, which is still pretty sizable amount above the guys that we are looking at in kind of the top 20-ish range. He would have scored basically a top 30 season instead of a top 15 season. And if you're aggressive even a little bit more, then you're looking at a guy who's probably top 30, top 40. So something has to change in order for A.J. Brown to pay off that price tag.
And I think it's totally possible that it does, because the rest of the Titans receiver core, pass catchers, I'm high on Jonnu Smith. That's another player that I keep finding myself drafting outside of like the top 10 tight ends that I think could be a top 12 tight end or whatever. But look, Corey Davis, I think Corey Davis has become a fine, okay starting NFL receiver, but that is it. Adam Humphries is a Jag slot receiver, and you're just not getting excited about much else there. Brown could really be I could see this being a classic fantasy community situation where we have like the numbers right from that perspective. Like you said, you regress the yards per target, fantasy points per target down a little bit, but what if he does see 115, 120 targets? I think that's totally possible if the Titans aren't playing that run the ball football script as much as they might want to be, or as much as they were last year. I think that's totally possible. So I think A.J. Brown could just be, like I said, one of those players where the talent creates more opportunity because he's just that good, checks literally every box you want.
Yeah, and I think that's a total way. And Brian, I saw you shaking your head. You're not buying the Corey Davis who's still got something in the tank.
No, I will not take any Corey Davis slander. He's still somebody I'm holding out hope for in Dynasty.
Oh no!
And someday he will come to something.
Maybe we could trade him to Carolina for Curtis Samuel, and then everything.
Oh no!
Don't do that! Don't do that! Don't bring up Curtis Samuel already. Come on, let's wait on that one. Well, I think look, Corey Davis is going to be a free agent this next year, so maybe you won't have long to wait. He'll be someone's number 2 receiver and be just fine.
Yeah. And I'm really optimistic that they do open the offense because A.J. Brown is worthy of the volume, worthy of that elite wide receiver production. And if it comes and Brian, he's that guy and he's getting 120 targets, he's obviously going to pay off that ADP and then some. Yeah.
I kind of agree with you guys with just the way, just their style of offense is not predicated to producing a massive return in production for a wide receiver, but his talent kind of overrides their scheme. And especially considering that Delanie Walker's gone, like Matt was saying, there's really no other guys on the outside that other than maybe Jonnu Smith, which, he's had flashes, but he hasn't been able to be consistent enough to prove that he's that number 1 option yet. But Tennessee's they're going to pound the rock again. And then once they get down in the red zone, we're going to see them run that play action game. And this is going to be AJ Brown down in the red zone. And, he could be putting up double-digit touchdowns, even with a similar target share of, and only getting 90 to 100 targets. The one thing that does worry me with them is that last year they were bottom 3 in total plays for the season, because once they get ahead, they don't feel the need to take any chances when you have a battering ram like Derrick Henry. So, if they're playing in a lot tighter games, which I kind of expect in that division with Indianapolis getting better, I think we could see his production actually increase.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I also think I'm hopeful that they learn from the Kansas City game, and that you can't really put yourself in that tight of a box where if one or two things goes wrong and everything goes sideways, then you're pretty much got nothing else.
And before we transition away from Tennessee, I do want to pat myself on the back real quick for touting Ryan Tannehill early last season as the guy that should take over in Tennessee. So
Nice.
Well, he definitely rewarded John Robinson and company for going and trading for him, and we'll see what he does in year 2. I'm still cautiously optimistic, but we'll see. Let's head to Pittsburgh and let's talk about Deante Johnson. He is getting a lot of hype right now. And I think for the right reasons, but Matt, I guess for you, what's your read on the Steelers kind of in general? Obviously, we didn't see Big Ben, all of last year, basically. A lot of Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph and just atrocious quarterback
that says it all.
How are you just kind of are you just trying to wipe away last year and kind of plan ahead as if Big Ben's going to be his, at least 80% of what he has been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're really banking on, is we need to see Ben being about 80%, something around a top 12 level quarterback. So I think you have to bake in the risk, though, that that's not going to happen, and I want to learn from my own mistakes here, because I don't think I baked in any risk with a player. We just talked about Curtis Samuel last year. I didn't bake in any, I love Curtis Samuel, but I didn't bake in any risk that Kyle Allen is going to be out there, not Cam Newton 3 weeks into the damn season, and everything is, it's over at that point for everybody except CMC and DJ Moore running 25 slants and dig routes a game. Anyway, so no hard feelings though, Kyle Allen. But anyways, I think you got to bake into some risk there that Juju is a great rebound candidate. Deante Johnson is one of, if not my favorite breakout candidates at wide receiver this year. James Washington is the guy I continually draft in the late rounds because I think there's a chance he's going to be popping every few weeks too. I think James Conner is a nice value at running back if he can stay healthy. But here's the deal. If 3 weeks into the season, Ben's elbow is not working right, or he's clearly out there, 50% of what he was, a bottom 5 level, bottom 10 level quarterback, then, all bets are off, because then either we're seeing a compromised form of an older quarterback, or we're seeing the Duck Hodges, Mason Rudolph show again. And we already know how that goes. So, but let's take it from the scenario. Let's be optimistic for a second. And let's say that Ben is going to come back 16 games and it'd be about 80% of what he was, not top 5,000 yards a season type guy, but pretty solid numbers as a passer. Then I think we're really looking great here in Pittsburgh, because I don't think that Juju Smith-Schuster is a number 1 receiver. I don't think he can beat press and man coverage enough to be that type of player. You can't run an offense through that type of guy, but that type of guy can be very productive, like a Jarvis Landry type player, if there's someone on the outside popping off too. And the Steelers have great candidates to do that. And obviously, I said Deante Johnson is my favorite. He finished at the 88th percentile in success rate versus man coverage, 75%, a guy who only fell below the NFL average success rate on 2 routes and reception perception. This guy's getting open like a stud in his rookie year. He's making big plays, several long touchdowns as well. So I love him as sort of in that Stephon Diggs archetype, not that type of player. I don't know. He might not end up having that ceiling, but I definitely think he can be that coverage dictating outside wide receiver that wins at all levels of the field that you need for a Juju to successfully pop off. We've already seen that happen when Antonio Brown was there and, being a normal human being for the most part. So there's a lot to unlock for this Pittsburgh offense. Johnson being the one that I really, really like. I'm right there hyping him up with everybody else because I believe in him. But again, we just have to bake in the risk here that if 3 weeks into the season, just like we had in Carolina last year, we've got a compromised quarterback, we're going to have some problems here. And then I see it being a situation where maybe Juju catches 85, 90 passes, maybe crosses 1,000 yards. And the rest of these guys were like, man, Johnson, Washington, these guys are making plays every now and again, but we're really going to have to wait till Pittsburgh finds their quarterback of the future to really see what this offense can do.
Yeah. No, and I think those are great points. And Brian, I guess, if we assume that Deante Johnson can kind of be that outside guy opposite Juju, maybe a Juju rebirth is in the cards.
Yeah, I think Juju is one of my favorite guys that I'll be targeting as a rebound candidate, even with a Roethlisberger that say he's not 80%, say he's even 60, 70%. The threat of Roethlisberger in the backfield, it just improves their offense. I mean, exponentially over Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. And that opens up the field for everybody, including James Conner, Deante Johnson, big play James, and Juju to be able to kind of, play the game that he wants, which, Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, they proved last year, they just couldn't get him the ball in those tight scenarios. And, he needs a guy that could even just fit it in there, even with less arm strength than he previously had. I think just the presence of Roethlisberger will improve everybody's fantasy outlook for this season.
I'd be feeling so much better if they just gotten Jameis Winston.
Yes.
I know, he would have been a perfect replacement. I still wonder if they go talk to Cam Newton, especially if Big Ben's rolling back and it's just not there. But
I can't believe they stood pat with those two guys as their backups. Rudolph is just one of those quarterbacks you watch play and it's just not it. He has no internal clock. As soon as pressure's around, the play is dead over. Just will never be the type of quarterback that can last in the NFL. And I mean, he's just one of those guys. You don't need to see you don't need to see a wide sample size for that.
Yep. And some of the stuff they ran at Oklahoma State definitely masked it. Obviously, having James Washington to throw the ball to was very nice. But yeah, these guys that go to the NFL and it's apparent quickly. And for a team to stand pat with those two guys, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But Brian, this is a guy. Deante Johnson was a guy that made strides at the end of the season. So I'm really hopeful that. In terms of volume, he can be a guy that gets a decent amount and 5, 7, 8 targets a game. That would be really nice. Let's head to Baltimore. Let's stay in the division and let's talk some Hollywood Brown, because this is a guy that I keep finding myself gravitating towards. Obviously came on crazy hot last year, looked really good. Injury kind of took him away. We didn't, the bloom came off the rose just a little bit. But Brian, this is one of 80 receivers to see 50 plus targets in 2019. He was 10th in fantasy points per target. He caught 7 touchdowns on 2/3 of his targets. The only other receivers to do that: Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Juju Smith-Schuster, and Calvin Ridley. So that's pretty good company for an offense that I think, from year 1 to year 2 with Lamar, obviously dramatic. Another step forward, a little more versatile, a little more in terms of passing ability. Hollywood Brown could be, I think, an absolute steal in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, he's another guy. He came into the season last year where he was entering his rookie year with a pre-existing injury. So we didn't really get to see him fully unleashed. And he still produced massive numbers on limited amount of targets. And he's a guy I expect to see an actual increase in role in this offense. I like him to be a guy that's going to get, 10 to 20 carries more this year. He's going to be getting a lot of deep balls. I mean, I see him as being their version of Tyreek Hill that Kansas City has, where he's running those deep, 20-yard digs, those goes, those deep slants down the middle, and he could put up a tremendous year in an offense that I expect to see them expand the passing game for Lamar, as they got shown in the playoffs that you need to be able to throw the ball if you want to win when it really matters. So I think in the regular season, they're going to kind of use those games to see what they have in that offense and kind of expand on what Lamar can do.
And Matt, I know obviously you were a big fan of him coming into the draft. What did you see in year one that, did it kind of live up to your expectations, or, was there something that you thought maybe was missing a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely lived up to my expectations. And you said it. This was a guy I was really high on coming into the NFL because obviously everybody knows about the speed. Everybody knows that he's a vertical playmaker. He can make plays after the catch. He's just incredibly elusive. But I actually think you didn't see as much of that as you could because of the injury and, the multiple injuries, not just the injury that he came in with, but the injuries throughout the entire season, which could have just been compounding from the original foot injury. Who knows? But what you clearly saw both in college and I think in his rookie year is that this guy is a technician. Brown is a really disciplined route runner that knows when to break things off, knows how to deceive and get into the heads of cornerbacks. And that came through in reception perception with the 73.6% success rate versus man coverage. That's the 83rd percentile and puts him in very exciting company. And I know we're going to talk about second-year receivers here. I'm so excited about this class, this 2019 class. I mean, every guy we're probably going to talk about today, I'm going to tell you is really good, and I'm very excited about because I think this is the best class of wide receivers since that 2014 group. Like everybody was really excited about this 2020 class. Great, and they might well be very good, but it's going to be hard to top this 2019 group because Brown, AJ Brown, Marquise Brown, Deante Johnson, Tebow Samuel, only 4 in. I got a lot more good stats to read off for these guys, but just that disclaimer that I'm probably going to hype up everybody we talk about. But Marquise Brown really, I think, could explode this year because he's attached to the MVP in Lamar Jackson. And I think it's just it's crazy. I never would have thought that Jackson could have that type of season as an efficient passer without Hollywood Brown popping off for 16 games. So if he's healthy and ready to roll as a vertical playmaker and a full field route runner, I think there's just a ton of potential here. They also didn't add too many other players in their passing game either. I think Miles Boykin, I'm still got him on the watch list for sure. They've got the tight ends, and obviously they added a new running back. They're still going to be establishing the run there. But never mind all that. I think Brown can be like the clear top dog in this passing game. And as Brian said, I expect them to expand that passing game too.
Yeah. And I want Miles Boykin to be part of that expansion because I think he totally deserves to be involved. And I think he is a guy that has the ceiling to be an excellent option opposite Hollywood Brown. Let's stay in the DMV. Let's go from Baltimore. Let's go down to DC. And let's talk Terry McLaurin. Brian, talk to me about your favorite Buckeye because I think are you frozen into existence again? Yeah, you're frozen. All right, Matt.
Oh man, he was giving him the question.
He's so excited his computer just froze. He can't handle it. Talk to me about McLaurin and what you saw because I think obviously in terms of draft day price didn't get the hype of the other guys, but came out in a big way. Even with the questionable quarterback play there in DC, what can we expect from McLaurin, going into year 2?
Yeah, he's a guy like on the other end of the spectrum from what we talked about with Mason Rudolph, where you just watch Terry McLaurin play on Sunday. You don't have to do the advanced work that I do, and you're like, oh yeah, this guy's good. He just pops right off the screen, whatever. But going back and looking at him for reception perception, I was that much more impressed with him. I mean, like I said, we've talked a lot about all these wide receivers I'm really excited about from the 2019 group. The one I might be most excited about is Terry McLaurin. And I mean, because he is in some elite company in reception perception. I put out the charts of the top 35 seasons in success rate versus man and press coverage. McLaurin is on both of those, a rare rookie feat here. I mean, we're talking the top success rate versus man coverage scores. He's 34th in that one all time in reception perception history. So that's all the way back to 2014. That's over 250 charted seasons. He's the 34th best success rate versus man coverage score. Then when you look at press coverage, if you adjust it for guys who see a lot of press coverage, he is 15th on that list. So, I mean, again, we're talking about a player. I don't want to I think he's legitimately comparable to Odell Beckham at his peak. I know that's like crazy high praise, but that's the type of player that I think we're seeing, because it's not just the fact that he separates against man coverage, he separates press coverage, he separates, deep, intermediate, short, all the routes that you want. He's also able to make those spectacular catches too. Maclaurin in his reception perception sample saw a contested catch attempt on 30.9% of his sample targets and caught 82.4 of them. It's just like mind-boggling stuff for a rookie wide receiver. And here's the deal, guys. All we need for Maclaurin to really go, absolutely bananas at his price is for your boy Dwayne Haskins to just be passable. Like we're talking if I think Maclaurin could be, Allen Robinson in his second year when he just goes crazy and scores in the top 5 in fantasy. If everything, kind of breaks right in a peak scenario, highest in his range of outcomes. Cause you think about it, the Jags were not a good team that year. I don't expect Washington to be a good team. They could be in some shootout situations. And you're looking at a guy that, just like I thought Robinson had the potential to be an elite receiver someday, I think that Maclaurin has the potential to be an elite receiver and dominate that target tree there, because you're just looking at a bunch of other guys that are unproven there too. And again, I just need Haskins to be like Blake Bortles good. But can he be Blake Bortles good? I don't know. There's enough signal from the end of the season, though, to be slightly optimistic, to be fair. In his last 3 games, he kind of finished relatively strong. 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, 67% completion rate, 8.8 adjusted yards per attempt. Those are pretty good numbers to end what was a disastrous rookie season at times. So, again, all we're asking, just be passable.
Yeah, and I think he can do that. And Brian, obviously, we watched a ton of Big Ten football. We saw plenty of Haskins. When there's protection, when the offensive line does their part, he could be a serviceable to maybe a little bit above that, and maybe more. Who knows? But I think if the offensive line does their part, I'm really curious to see how Ron Rivera's, what his impact is and how much he can have it in year one. Because obviously with, we're probably not going to have OTAs. We're probably not going to have a different training camp. Things are going to be unique. But if he's able to get Dwayne on Zoom calls and go over stuff and completely work with him, and then when they can finally get on the field and throw the football, if he's not thinking, if he's not worried about getting crushed, he might actually be able to be okay. And then Terry McLaurin's going off and Antonio Gibson's going off. And all of a sudden Washington's offense, not terrible. And that's all we're asking.
Not asking for much here.
Terry, it really pains me to say it as a Michigan fan and as a Cowboys fan. Terry McLaurin is probably one of my favorite wide receivers going into the 2020 season. I know Matt is like the king of the reception perception, all these statistics. So I let him do his thing. But so last night I did a little deeper dive into Washington and Ron Rivera's regime here. And Scott Turner, who he brought in, he actually helped Sam Bradford break the NFL record at the time for completion percentage. He helped Cam Newton set his own personal and franchise record for the Carolina Panthers in completion percentage. So I do think that the addition of Scott Turner, who was the quarterback's coach at those times, who is now the OC in Washington, will make a big difference in Dwayne Haskins' progression as an NFL quarterback, which will in turn lead to more production from Terry McLaurin, who he only played in 14 games and he almost eclipsed 1,000 yards. And just like Matt was saying, like he goes up and gets the ball at an elite level. He creates so much separation. It's almost like he's playing a video game against guys like, being a Cowboys fan, watching him face Dallas, he made Byron Jones look like he was on ice skates. And Byron Jones is one of the top corners in the NFL in man-to-man coverage. McLaurin, I think he actually sees his target percentage increase. He saw a little bit over a fifth of the targets in Washington. They were the worst pass offense in the NFL, which that's got to increase. I mean, you can only go up after crappy production like that. And the best thing that I saw from McLaurin was early on in the season when they had Case Keenum, who was a very efficient passer in those short to intermediate routes. Terry McLaurin looked like a guy who was going to finish in the top 10 at the position with a quarterback who could get him the ball. Mm-hmm. So just like you guys said, just be passable.
Yeah. And I think Stability at the quarterback position will be good. And I also think kind of the shaky play by Haskins down the stretch, obviously, as Matt pointed out, he got better. I think it might actually make his draft day price a little more affordable because people are going to remember, and Dwayne Haskins is a starter, and I don't want any part of that.
Isn't it funny that like Haskins, it was so not good as a rookie that no one even mentions that they were teammates in college anymore? Yeah. Like, no, it's not even a possible good thing that these two guys have familiarity with each other.
Yeah, I know. I remember because everybody's like, "Oh, Haskins and McLaurin's going to be good," and yeah, it's wild. It is same with James Washington. That college tie, that college tie isn't always what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, guys, like I'm not bailing you out at the NFL level anymore. I've done enough of that.
Yeah. I carried you for 4 years here. I can't handle that anymore. All right, Matt, I'm going to give you a little choose your own adventure here. I'm going to give you a list of names. You tell me where you want to go. We could talk Darius Slayton, Mecole Hardman, DK Metcalf, Hunter Renfrow. We can go out to the desert and talk Andy Isabella, Hakeem Nicks. Any of those names jump out to you? Yeah, Hakeem.
He wishes he was Hakeem Nicks, man. let's talk Metcalf. I mean, let's go with the biggest name.
All right, let's go to Seattle. Let's talk DK Metcalf. Obviously, your boy Tyler Lockett busted out in a big way. Opposite. What are we doing with Seattle? Is this the offense? Is like their OC going to finally realize that they have two stud receivers, talent at the tight end position, and not run into the pile every play?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Seattle has potential to have a top 5 wide receiver duo right here on its hands. I mean, when you look at obviously Tampa Bay, they've got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, of course. The Bills, like we talked about up top, John Brown, Stephon Diggs, I think they're in the conversation. Of course, the Falcons duo, Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, those guys are two great players in their own right. Absolutely. I think that when you look at who's after that, you got to start considering Lockett and Metcalf. You guys know how big of a fan I am of Tyler Lockett. I think he's become a true number 1 receiver, coverage dictating guy that people have to take account for on every play, and has really blossomed into the player that I was telling you since 2016. You're going to be a little bit patient with me on this one. But with DK Metcalf, I think he was a lot of what we expected if you were high on him. I mean, because there were some people that just thought he absolutely couldn't play and wasn't going to be successful in the NFL. But I mean, I liked Metcalf a lot for what he was, and that was pretty much what he was as a rookie. Seattle did a good job of keeping his route assignments pretty simple. Over 50% of his charted routes and reception perception were either a slant or 9 route. I mean, that is an absurdly constricted route tree. However, Metcalf showed that he could not only dominate on those 2 patterns, he had one of the best success rate on slant route scores in the entire history of reception perception. He also finished at the 85th percentile in success rate versus man coverage overall. So you saw him separate well on the curl, the out, the dig, the comeback, a variety of different scores, and he was really good against press coverage. I mentioned that top 35 adjusted success rate versus press coverage score, and I only say adjusted because cut the minimum threshold for guys who see an above average rate of man coverage. Metcalf is on that list as a rookie. I think that he can become, this was my take coming into the NFL, and it's even more so my take now based on how similar the reception perceptions are. I think that DK Metcalf could become a Dez Bryant type of player if he hits his highest range of outcomes. Yeah, throw up that X, Brian. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I think those guys are just so similar. I thought that watching them in college, and I definitely thought so after watching him in the NFL, because Dez was awesome in some of these success rate versus man coverage, success rate versus press coverage metrics, but nobody was ever going to call him, the most refined or detailed route runner. He's just a awesome getting off the line of scrimmage and was just a physical freak. And I think Metcalf is the same player. What you're really hoping for in fantasy, and just those of us who believe in people doing sane things, those of us out there who are wearing our masks, folks, we also believe in another thing that some sane people should do. It's not even just that we want Seattle to pass the ball more or to become, one of the most aggressive aerial attacks in the NFL. That's just probably not going to happen. But I think there's a chance that just like we saw Evans and Godwin split the targets at almost 50% of the passing targets in Tampa Bay last year, I think there's a chance that Metcalf and Lockett could be a 45%, 50% group here, because Greg Olsen and a couple of question marks at tight end. Nothing really going on beyond these two guys at wide receiver, and none of their running backs are all that great as pass catchers. So I think that's your hope if both of these players are going to hit in fantasy.
Yeah, and we're wanting a Minnesota situation. We want Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. Yep. And if we can get that out of these two guys, I think, they'll both be incredibly valuable. And Brian, I didn't have high expectations for DK. I was not. My computer just turned off. Cool. That's cool. My computer decided it was done for a minute.
We're still going.
We're still here. So I didn't have high expectations for him coming out. I thought this was a guy that was a straight line runner. That's all he could do. There wasn't going to be much to his game, and I think he fits in really well. And I think Russell Wilson's ability to extend plays and put the ball in the right spot really helped DK. Have a little bit of easier transition. And if he takes another step in year 2, this might, a Dez Bryant comp. I don't think it's as crazy as some might think it might be.
It just like you guys said, if he turns into Dez Bryant down in the red zone where he's just bodying up fools and, backing them down in the end zone like Shaq used to do. I mean, he could approach, 12, 13 touchdowns just with his size down there. And I'm with you, Kyle. Coming into the NFL, I was a little worried about Metcalf's lateral agility. I looked a little bit too much into those cone drills and all that stuff, and didn't really just look at like how skilled he was at going up and getting the ball, and just how effective his size is down the field against smaller DBs and stuff like that. And it doesn't hurt that he's got a guy in Russell Wilson who's probably one of the most efficient passers we've seen over the last 10 years. So, he's a guy that I am so happy to hear Matt talk up, as I snagged him in a dynasty league for the 3rd pick in the 1st round this year. So hopefully he comes to fruition and turns out that top 10, top 15 wide receiver thing this year.
Yeah, no. And I think that that makes a ton of sense. Brian, I'm going to give you a couple names to run through and see where your head's at. I think we should go to the desert and talk about the two guys that you wanted to make sure we hit on, because I still like Hakeem Butler, even though he wishes he was Hakeem Nicks. Andy Isabella is still there. But, I mean, obviously, they bring in DeAndre Hopkins, and that obviously he's going to garner a lot of volume. He's going to garner a lot of attention. Matt Fitzgerald is still there. What can we reasonably expect from the pieces around Hopkins? And is there potential in year 1 as Hopkins transitions that maybe the love is spread out a little bit more, especially with a lack of OTAs, a lack of offseason?
Yeah, I think there's a lot working against Hopkins from just a non-individual player standpoint. I just wrote about this actually for Yahoo on the players who will shape the 2020 NFL season. Fingers crossed there is one, of course, always with everything we say. But, and I think Hopkins is going to be one of those players, because he's going to not only affect the offense that he's in Arizona, which we're all going to be watching that, but he's also going to leave just a massive gap behind with the team that he left in Houston. And because I think Hopkins, if he's not the best receiver in the NFL, he's one of the best. And there's so many things that he does well. And I would actually note that in 2019 in reception perception, he probably had his best season ever. 94th percentile success rate versus man coverage, 91st percentile against press. Both of those were the best marks of his career. And he was also one of the select few receivers to go, what I like to say, full green, where the entire route tree is green, because he had an above average success rate on every single route. So awesome trade again, Houston. Really great stuff. One other thing that I think is great about Hopkins, and I think actually could lend to the point where maybe he doesn't produce as much individually as we're expecting or what we're used to. He's actually, like I said, one of those true coverage dictating receivers. In the entire course of reception perception, for all of the highest double coverage rate seasons, 2 of his seasons are in the top 3. So, I mean, he is one of these guys that defenses pay extra attention to, more so than any other receiver in the NFL. And I think that could be a situation where, sure, if people do that for him in Arizona, then you're maybe looking at who else can benefit from that single coverage. I think that I still like Christian Kirk, but I think that he's like an average type starting receiver, which there's nothing wrong with that, but there's not enough, even with Larry Fitzgerald, slowly falling off. I don't know that there's any like discernible gap between their skill sets, at this point in their careers, which is not great news for a guy who's heading into his third season and a guy who's, about to retire. But Fitz is one of the all-time greats, so we'll give Kirk a pass on that. It's not meant to be as slanderous as it sounds. But so I think those two guys sort of provide the same thing. If they're playing in 4 wide receiver sets, those two guys probably are going to be on the inside on, either the left or right side. So who's going to be that other outside receiver? I think that if Isabella lands that spot, I think there's a lot of exciting potential for them to create vertically, especially that's why I think about Hopkins and Will Fuller back in Houston, because when you're dictating that much coverage to one guy and it's not the vertical threat, you're in trouble there on the other side of the field. And that's why when, Watson, Hopkins, and Fuller were on the field together, there were so many big plays that went to Fuller's direction. And, that just didn't happen very often because Fuller's never on the field. So Andy Isabella could be really exciting if he's in that role. And I mean, Akeem Butler's hard because he's the guy who was drafted later. He didn't really get much going in training camp, injuries, etc. But I wouldn't completely write off that he has an impact just because they want to clearly play so many wide receivers there. And I also think that, I wasn't the biggest Hakeem Butler fan, but I know Matt Waldman, who I really respect, was a big Hakeem Butler fan. And he even raised the possibility that maybe Butler would be a better big slot receiver at some point in his career than outside X receiver. I don't think, and that could be a potential situation if Fitzgerald retires after 2020, then Butler takes that other inside slot receiver spot, and then we could really be looking at a nice trio, foursome there if Kirk is still anything better than late Larry Fitzgerald.
Man, I wanted Christian Kirk to be a thing so bad.
He's not a bad player. Like, yeah. I think he could be. I compared him coming into the NFL to be Randall Cobb, and I think that could be the type of player he ends up becoming. Cobb, we've always still been chasing that 2014 season when he was just a monster, but I think by and large he's been a pretty good slot receiver for his entire career, and I think that's probably what Kirk is in a peak situation.
Yeah, and I kind of, I don't know, the whole Kirk, there was a lot of trade rumors, especially around the draft time. So I don't know how confident they are of him. He might be a guy that needs another situation to kind of find himself and maybe fit better. But Brian, I think Matt brings up a lot of good points, especially this offense is going to want to run a lot of plays. It's going to want to throw a lot. Obviously, you're going to use Kenny and Drake in a plethora of situations, but there's going to be opportunities for receivers not named DeAndre Hopkins, and maybe they find something with Hakeem Butler and they play him inside, they play him outside, and he grows a lot in this year, in year 2, and then by year 3, when Fitzgerald's out of the way, he's ready to take off and become somebody we can use on a week-to-week basis in fantasy. Yeah,
that's something that I've been kind of hoping for as I've recently acquired a few stocks of Butler. Sans Larry Fitzgerald, they're going to need a guy to take over that kind of big slot receiver role. And, Butler, he's got the size for it. He's offers up a big target range for Kyler Murray. He's different than any of the other guys other than maybe DeAndre Hopkins on the team, with Isabella and Kirk both being smaller wide receivers. I just like his prospects as a guy who could not necessarily be that, 7-8 target guy, but 4 or 5 targets inside the 20s, that could bring huge production in the touchdown numbers as a flyer in weeks.
All right, Matt, we got one more for you before we get out of here, and I want to pick your brain. I want to talk Chris Godwin, because I think he is a little bit polarizing this offseason. I think obviously there's a lot of hype and excitement, and what he did last year was incredible. With the talks of a lot more 12 personnel, a lot more Gronk and Brait, or Gronk and OJ, a lot more Chris Godwin probably on the outside. Where are you at with him going into the season? Do you think we still see a ton of him in the slot? Do you think, he is more outside with the 2 tight ends deployed? And do you think he can be successful out there?
Well, first of all, I think that teams always talk about playing a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of 2 tight end sets, but most teams, at least over 50% of their plays, are going to be in 11 personnel. So I think Godwin's going to see enough slot reps that it won't really matter that much. And I think I think it's important for Godwin from a statistical perspective to be on the inside, just because it's just so much easier to play as a slot receiver. It's so much easier. You're going to end up getting covered in zone coverage a lot. Because you're going to see a lot more linebacker, safeties, all that type of stuff. But I think if Godwin had to play outside, I totally think he's capable of doing it. Chris Godwin, when he came into the NFL at Penn State, he legitimately almost never played in the slot. He was an outside receiver and was really good at it. And even last year in reception perception, he was over 80% in success rate versus press coverage. And again, he's not seeing a ton of it because he's playing inside. But I think in the situations where you did see someone press him when he had to line up outside, he's more than capable of beating that type of coverage. And again, I think that he's successful on a variety of different routes, but I think he's a better fit with what Tom Brady, I don't think it's a hot take, but I think he's a better fit with what Brady does right now than Mike Evans is. And that's not to say that Evans is going to have a bad season either, because I think he's a better separator than people give him credit for. Not every pass that he catches is going to be with somebody draped on his back. And I think he can actually be a bit of an accuracy eraser for Tom Brady, because when you look at those like under pressure metrics that I was talking about with Josh Allen all the way back up at the top, and how bad he is when the play drags on, or how bad or how inaccurate he is under pressure, who's right there with him back in 2019? One Tom Brady. And I mean, I think Mike Evans is going to help out a lot with that. But I do really think that Godwin has great success on vertical routes, but also those dig routes, slant routes. Those are going to be really good fits with Tom Brady. And he's also very good after the catch. So, I mean, I think from a on-field play perspective, he checks every box. And I'm not worried. I'm not worried about him at all if he's got to play more outside. I'm not worried that there's a quarterback change. I think that he's probably not going to be number 2 in terms of fantasy rankings and wide receiver this year. And I don't know that I'm taking that many early round wide receivers that he's going to end up on a lot of my teams anyways, because I want to draft Terry McLaurin and Deante Johnson and all these guys a little bit later. But still, I don't have any problems with ranking him as wide receiver 6, 7, something like that.
Yeah, and I like the Mike Evans as an eraser, because if you ask Johnny Football from his time back at A&M, that was a thing that Mike Evans did a lot, saved Johnny Football's ass over and over. All right, Matt, this was a ton of fun. Obviously, you bring all the information. We appreciate you taking some time joining us. What do you got going over at Yahoo?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. We've got a lot going on right now. I mentioned it a couple times with the Josh Allen piece, the DeAndre Hopkins piece. Also, the first piece was about Patrick Mahomes. It's the characters that are going to tell the story, the main characters of the story of the 2020 NFL season. So not only am I looking at those players specifically, it's kind of the web that they reach out to. Like I said, Hopkins is going to impact Deshaun Watson, even though they're not playing together anymore. Hopkins is also going to impact his new quarterback, maybe some sleepers like Isabella, Butler, all of that. Josh Allen, of course, like I said at the top, I'm riding or dying with Josh Allen because I need him to work out for my guy, Stephon Diggs, and my guy, John Brown. So that series right now is kind of what I'm working on. And of course, if people are interested in reception perception, the best way to access the information is just go on Twitter, #reception perception, and you can find a link there, or you can find the link at receptionperception.com to purchase the ultimate draft kit, where reception perception is exclusively once again this year.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile investment, especially if you want to take some time and read about these receivers, because learning why they're successful, what they're doing, why they're consistently making catches, making plays, even if the stats don't always back that up. It really helps as a forward thinking, as guys you want to invest in, guys you want to go get in dynasty, all that stuff. So Matt, I love having conversations like this. We'll have to do this once again. For Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.